within the common support region. And let me explain a little bit about the common support region. What usually happens is that outliers from the control units and also from the beneficiaries are removed from the analysis.
So do you have a question if one participated and one did not participate? So, and so if it is yes, assuming we implement a program here, and he is my twin brother, but he did not receive, so I could assume that the propensity score could be very close, yeah, because we live in the same community, maybe the conditions are similar. But would you expect, for example, spillover effects? Because we're in the same village, we are doing the same thing. Because when you are choosing for you to assign me as treated, him as not treated, you are using this variable to say, did you participate in the FISP or not? So at that level, do you think there could be spillover effect? Do you think you would start to think about economy-wide effects or community-wide effects or something like that? Thank you.
And I think that question now is too broad to answer. But yeah, I think we can discuss during tea break.
Thank you. I think let me start from the second question, whether we are controlling for the compounding factors. As I have mentioned in my presentation, we control the household and farm characteristics in order to deal unobserved heterogeneity and possible selection bias. Basically, we know that adoption of climate-smart agricultural practice may not be random. Instead, farmers may make a decision based on information that is not available to the researcher, to us. So in that case, this information might influence the adoption and the outcome equation, which leads basically to self-selection bias. So in our case, to deal with those self-selection bias, we use endogenous switching approach that involves two-stage estimation approach. So I think from our side, we try to control all variables that influence the outcome and adoption equation. That's one. And second is that based to the food diversity, as I mentioned, we used two household nutritional indicators. One is the data diversity index, and the other is nutritional adequacy, basically calorie and protein consumption. So we didn't deal basically across the food groups. What we did was we constructed a dietary diversity index, and we tried to look this diversity index and is influenced by adopting either more or fewer number of climate-smart agricultural practices. That's what we did. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Similar to Elias. Access to extension services in NATS program is demand-driven. Farmers demand for services. Therefore, they make a choice whether to demand or to go for extension services or not. So we followed this then using the LSMS data on, did you access extension services? Did you access the NATS program services? So with the yes or no is when we created the participants and non-participants, and then we follow the same analysis of counterfactuals.
Question regarding mechanisms. Could any of you address the question of mechanisms behind these average treatment effects or the selection into the program?
I didn't get the point of the last question. Can you please forward it again?
Sure, thank you. So all of you were presenting the effects of, say, an extension program, a climate-smart agriculture program, on something like crop diversity, diet diversity. So these aren't things you might naturally think A would cause B. So while your focus has been on the identification of the treatment effect, my question is, how was this treatment effect achieved? So do you have a sense about what the pathways were through which, for instance, the FISP program was affecting crop diversity?
I think, for instance, when looking at the adoption of climate-smart agricultural practice and how it's linked also to nutritional outcome, I think we can look multiple pathways. One potential pathway might be through increased consumption that might be facilitated through increase the quantity of on-farm food production. That's one. And then the second pathway might be through increased income, which would be realized by increased productivity and also high-yielding crop varieties. So in this case, there might be some multiple potential pathways how adoption of climate-smart agricultural practice, whether in combination or in isolation, would lead to achieving higher diversity of food or food and nutritional security.
Yeah, as for the study from Zambia on the fertilizer support input policy, I mentioned towards the end that this is work in progress. We are trying to identify those pathways, but we have some indications of probably what is happening, because when we looked at the crop diversity index, it was positive but insignificant. But when we looked at the diversification of agricultural income, it was significant and positive. So what we are suspecting is that probably the program, though it's giving fertilizer and is concentrating on the maize, farmers are using the fertilizer on something else, but within the agricultural sector. So that's one of the pathways. But on the relationship between production diversity and also diversity, we couldn't find a direct link between the policy and also dietary diversity. So we want to go back and reanalyze and see whether that's through marketing or something else. Yeah. Okay.
Ada? Yes. So just to follow up on that question, if it's true that the effects are primarily through something else rather than own consumption of the increased production, I'm curious about heterogeneity and whether there's a bigger effect, estimating these average. Once you think about mechanisms, the next question would be, are these effects larger if it's a market purchase that leads to diet diversity for the households that are closer to markets? And I'm curious about a next step of this that would look at heterogeneity, perhaps first by proximity to markets, but then also other characteristics that would give people greater opportunity to use that mechanism of the diversification and agricultural and access to markets for purchase.
First, eh? Ladies first.
Good morning. My name is Miriam Matita. I want to ask a question on the production diversity. Others have argued that the computation has to reflect the food groups. I came in, I don't know for your study, is that the case? Because you're talking of the mechanisms being weak. Does it include or did it reflect the food groups when you were computing the production diversity? Thank you.
Is it directed for me, I think? Is it actually for me? Anyway, as I have said, we use two nutritional indicators. The one is the dietary diversity index, which looks across different food groups. So in that case, we didn't go for a count measure of dietary diversity because it doesn't reflect the relative importance of each group or the nutritional adequacy of each group. What we did in our case is we tried to construct the household dietary diversity index using Simpson index of food diversity, which gives emphasis on the relative importance of each food group. And in case of Simpson index, it reaches higher when food groups are distributed equally among the different food groups. So we try to get the best indicator of dietary diversity using the Simpson index of dietary diversity. But when we consider, if you are able to consider, for instance, the count measure, in that case, you fail to look the importance of each group, the importance of each food group in terms of nutritional adequacy. For in our case, then we have already considered the right indicator for Simpson index.
Yeah, we just to add on what you're saying, we considered the food groups. And actually, you know, the issue of food groups, we considered the 16 food groups. We considered the FAO 12 food groups. And also when we go back now, you know, we are going to consider the 6 women diversity food groups. So we considered the food groups. As for your comments, we'll take that into considerations. I think there were more like suggestions, which you, yeah, thank you.
Okay. So, any more burning questions or comments? Okay. So yeah. So thank you very much for coming, and thanks again to our presenters. Maybe we should give them another round of applause. Yes. So I think, as my colleague mentioned yesterday, these presentations are part of a bigger project, which is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So we really appreciate the support. And the project actually spans 4 sort of disparate activities. One is what you call collaborative research, which is where we bring together senior researchers from Africa and from around the globe to work together on these big issues. And the other is, of course, thematic research, where we have our early career researchers who come together to bringing together the senior researchers for capacity building purposes. And then we have faculty research. So some of the presentations today and also from yesterday are done by faculty members in the ARC network universities, especially the collaborative masters in agriculture and applied economics. Then, of course, we have thesis by students as well. That's the 4th track. So this is just a small part of the presentation, because this is a much bigger project and with so many papers in the project. So again, I want to thank the presenters and, of course, all the participants for coming to this session. So apologies for pushing you very hard, because it was only after your presentation we were told that we had the extra minutes, so which is unfortunate. We could have given you a bit more to expound on what you are doing, but we learned of the additional time after the fact. So thank you very much for this. Yeah.
All right, now good morning. So we're starting a little late, but it's going to be great. So this is one of two parallel sessions related to drivers of food choice. So we will go, we'll start late and finish late, and then at the end there'll be a coffee break, and we'll come back and have a debrief from the two parallel sessions so that those of you who are here can learn something about what happened in the other session and vice versa. So we have 6 presentations this morning. We're going to have 3 presentations, and then we'll have a short question and answer period, and then we'll resume with the other 3 presentations and then have questions for those. The talks are 8 minutes. We have timekeepers here that we're going to pay close attention to. And so let's get started. So our first presentation is Diana Carolina Lopera is presenting, and the talk relates to gender and its role in food choices.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to present the general aspect of our proposal funded by MANA and some preliminary results of the outcome variables that we have in our research. Considering decision making is difficult to observe and measure, with the research we want to observe and expect to provide evidence and testing new methodologies to measure intrafamily dynamics. So we can better understand the key factors in the decision-making process, especially the ones related with food consumption and diet diversity. There are some specific questions that we want to respond. The first 2 are related with the effects that have the income levels and the change in the income levels over food diversity and the effect of the nutrition information over food diversity. The third question that we want to answer is if households in which women have higher empowerment have different consumption patterns compared with households where women are less empowered. We implement our study in Guatemala because this is an interesting case of double burden malnutrition. Guatemala has around 50% of the highest prevalent stunting in Latin America and around 50% of overweight in women in reproductive age. We implement the study in 2 sites. One with a strong indigenous influence in the West, and one with a white and mestizo population in the east part of the country. Our methods have we collect several kind of tools. One are related with household level information. In this survey, we collect information related with household composition, land tenure, labor, production, poverty, and food diversity indicators. And at the individual level, we collect information related with anthropometric measures, and we implement the short version of the Women Empowerment Agricultural Index, and we implement 2 kind of games. One related with food choices, another related with labor preference. Okay. At the household level, we collect 250 observations, and at the individual level, we collect 500 observations. Okay, with the food choice game, we want to measure how food decisions vary with income changes and nutritional information. We will to analyze the difference between men and women and relate this to household nutrition. How the game works. As we present during the metrics fair, first the men and women play separate across 3 different income levels. 50 quetzales is around $7, 75 quetzales around $10, and 100 quetzal, that is around $14. And they are exposed to 2 combinations. One, they can choose only food products, and in the other combination, they can choose food and non-food products. Then they play the game together, but only at the lowest income level, that is 50 quetzales. We gave to the farmers a voucher to do real purchase in the village store to see what they are doing in their real lives. From the data, we can see some results, but in this moment they are preliminary. But from the data, we can see that the diversity, that is to say the number of food groups that they are select, increase with when the income level increase. That is what we expect. But when the food diversity decrease when the people has non-food products to choose. The number of food products, the number of food groups that they select in between men and women are quite similar. There are no significant difference between the number of groups that men and women select. And when we see the bar that is alone, that is represent the voucher that we gave to them, we see that the number of food groups that they choose are quite similar to a game. Other interesting thing that we see is that the information doesn't show a significant effect over the number of groups that they choose. Okay, and other diversity measure that we collect is the household diversity score to show the choices that they are doing in their real lives. We know that the closer to 12, more diversified is the diet. And we can see that in Guatemala, the sample that we have, have a diversity diet. But the important thing with this indicator is we are going to be able to compare real measures of the household with those from the game. The other part of the study is related with the time use analysis and labor preference. I don't have too much time, but with this game we want to understand what are the men's and women labor preference at various income levels. And with this game we want to identify what is the income level that women and men be able to switch agricultural work to household tasks. And we calculate the Women Empowerment Agricultural Index. The preliminary results shows that women in Guatemala are quite empowered. I'm not going in deep, but we can see the domains that contribute more to Guatemalan women's empowerment is the control of over the income workload. And the next step we are planning to continue with the exploratory data analysis and main regression model to explore the relation between outcome variables and input variables. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Thank you very much. So our next presenter is Anna Herthforth, who's going to talk with us about the role of food prices in influencing food choices.
Like my name, Anna, if you say it backwards, it says the same thing as if you say it forwards. So that's the idea here with this presentation, but this will be more fun, so let's go. So, spoiler alert, the conclusion here is that we need to start paying more attention to vegetables. So things like actions to reduce seasonality and prices of vegetables, to better integrate markets for vegetables and other perishable micronutrient-rich foods. And this can reduce the cost and the seasonality, seasonal price volatility of nutritious diets. But paying attention to vegetables, which, by the way, my daughter agrees with this conclusion. She wanted to be here, but said it was not going to be fun for a 7-year-old. This conclusion is not different than what nutritionists have been always saying. So what's new here? What's new is that this conclusion comes directly from data which countries have had all along. We just haven't been looking at that data in a way that allows us to see vegetables and other micronutrient-rich foods that are important for nutrition and health. So by looking at this data in a different way, we find results like vegetables are the main food group for which cost varies the most across time, it's the most seasonal, cost varies the most across geography, they cost the most per day out of what's needed on a nutritious plate, and they also drive differences between typical food price indicators, which are tracked by countries, and ours which take nutritional quality into account. And I want to say that along with vegetables, fruit and dairy and other micronutrient-rich foods are also important to cost variation. So moving on to some pictures of results. This graph shows that nutrient adequacy, the cost of nutrient adequacy in blue, is much more seasonally variable than the cost of calorie adequacy in orange. And fruits and vegetables had the sharpest seasonality in price. So they had 12 to 30% price swings over the year compared to 1 or 2% price swings for oils, maize, and beans, which are typically the commodities which are paid most attention to in price monitoring. So these fruits and vegetables are driving the greater seasonality in the cost of achieving adequate nutrients. Here's some further results from Pakistan showing that another thing we can do with food price data that are already in national systems collected all the time is to look at the variation across space. So this map shows that the nominal price of achieving food-based dietary guidelines, which are recommendations determined by national governments on what people should eat, that the cost of achieving those recommendations is highly variable. So the red here is most expensive and the green is least expensive. And the bar chart shows that the food groups that are most responsible for the disparities across region are vegetables, dairy, and fruits. So these are foods that are perishable. They're not as easily transported across space as oils and starchy staples and foods like dried lentils. So when we look at, still using this indicator of the cost of recommended diets, and we break down the cost by food group, here in Ghana, we see that the most expensive food group is vegetables, because a lot of vegetables are recommended. So this probably will impact consumption behavior, maybe adding less vegetables to the sauce because demand for vegetables is elastic or responsive to prices. So we see that it's a little trickier to meet the recommended diet in regard to some food groups more than others. And finally, we can make a direct comparison of the cost of nutritious foods with the cost of a typically purchased food basket. So the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, for food, which is shown in orange, is tracked by every country routinely as a national statistic. And here we show the Nutritious Food Price Index as an alternative, or the NPI, which is shown in blue. And it uses the very same data that countries track, but it reweights foods by their nutritional value. So here in Ghana, breaking down the metric by region, we see that in Accra, in the top graph, the prices for more nutritious foods rose less than the prices of other foods. But in Tamale, in the north, it was actually the opposite, where nutritious foods the prices were rising more quickly. And the disparity between these two lines, between the typical food basket and the nutritionally weighted food basket, is again mainly explained by vegetables and fruits, which are much more heavily weighted in the nutritious basket than the typical basket, and also by sugars and oils and soft drinks, which the nutritious basket downweights compared to typical consumption patterns. And it doesn't look like those differences are large in the previous slide, but when you look at the difference to the difference relative to the typical measure, which is the flat line, you can see that there are significant differences. And the implications here could be that, for example, in Accra, maybe because the nutritious food basket is actually getting cheaper in comparison to the typical one, maybe behavior change might be an appropriate intervention. Whereas in the north, we really need to focus on making nutritious foods cheaper and more available. So moving backward to our methods, these results came from 3 different indicators, 3 new ways of analyzing the same price data that countries typically collect. The Nutritious Food Price Index, which you just saw, the cost of recommended diets, which is a simple calculation based on the lowest cost of meeting food-based dietary guidelines, and then the cost, here shown in Sri Lanka, then the cost of nutrient adequacy uses linear programming to find the lowest cost of meeting nutrient requirements. The powerful thing about these methods is that we didn't collect the data. So the methods were actually designed around existing monitoring systems. So here we accompanied the Ministry of Food and Agriculture staff to the field, and we've been working closely with them. Some are in the audience here. And also the Ghana Statistical Service to design and mainstream these metrics. If any of you were here at the beginning, you heard from John Norty from MOFA about Ghana's efforts to mainstream these indicators, which makes Ghana the first country to mainstream an indicator of the cost of nutritious diets. And we're very happy about this close research to policy link. By we, I mean the team at Tufts and University of Ghana, which started with IANDA for the last 2 years, which was an Amana grant, and continued with a grant from UK Aid and the Gates Foundation in Kandasa. And also the World Bank SAF&C initiative funded the work shown for Pakistan here, and we've done also analysis for other South Asian countries. I just wanted to mention that that engagement started here last year at a learning lab, where some World Bank economists attended and thought these indicators would be really useful. So when countries like Ghana and when institutions like the World Bank use these metrics, it achieves the vision of this work, which is the final introduction and conclusion in one, which is that food price measurement should reflect the foods people need for healthy and active lives. And when government or institutions track food prices, which they do, they should be able to see and act on the price of nutritious food, which can support nutrition-sensitive agriculture by shedding light on the problem with data. And so when you use this nutrition lens on food prices, you begin to see vegetables where previously they were invisible. So thanks once again, and good morning.
So our next presentation is going to be done by Yasmin Kelly. Her group has two presentations, and we're going to switch the order of them because, well, you'll like it because you'll learn the methodology first. And so the first one she's going to talk about is related to drivers of food choice and diet change in Tanzanian pastoralists.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Hi, good morning. My name is Jasmine Kelly. Today I'm presenting on behalf of Dr. Amy Webb-Gerard at Emory University in Atlanta. So our project is our preliminary results from our Drivers of Food Choice project and transitioning pastoralist communities in Tanzania. So I'd like to point out that this project was in collaboration between Sokoine University of Agriculture in Tanzania, Emory University in the US, and ILRI. So the project background, pastoralists represent approximately 500 million people globally, and in response to changing environmental, social, and political pressures, pastoralists are shifting more to sedentary livelihoods through a process called sedentarization, with increasing use of cultivation as a livelihood instead of pastoralism. So research in East Africa suggests that this process has negative impacts on diet practices and health, specifically with substantial reductions in milk, meat, and blood consumption, and a replacing of those foods with increased maize meal and other cereals. So this shift has implications specifically for, for maternal and child health, as these populations are often left behind as men and herders take the animals away for grazing and watering. So this presents a unique opportunity to learn about the multiple drivers of diet change and food choice. For this project specifically, we're interested in understanding how these changing livelihood strategies, specifically through sedentarization, impacts sociocultural norms and gender norms, food access and food valuation in these communities, and how those combine together to impact food choice and diet change. We'll use these findings to develop a theoretical framework to explain diet change in this context and to inform policy and programming. So we used a mixed methods approach to achieve these aims. We're working in the Morogoro and Tonga regions of Tanzania, and we did these regions because ILRI was already hosting several projects there. So we worked in 6 proposively selected villages, as shown on the timeline here. We conducted 2 rounds of rapid ethnographic research, and our findings from the first round informed the tools and development for the second round. We also conducted 3 rounds of market surveys in each 3 seasons of the year, so capturing all the seasons throughout the year, to estimate the cost of nutritious diets using the Save the Children's cost of the diet approach. We also produced verbatim English transcripts from these ethnographic rounds, and we're in the process of analyzing all of the data right now using grounded theory, and today we're going to be presenting, or I'm going to be presenting, some of our preliminary findings. I'm going to skip that for time. So today I'm going to present how diets have changed between the past and now, and give 2 specific examples of the drivers of change behind the consumption of milk and blood, and then I'm going to skip diet affordability for time. So how are diets changing between then and now? These are 2 examples from a focus group and an in-depth interview of participants explaining how their diets have changed. Then they explain that diets primarily consisted of meat, milk, and cow blood, and several different types of millets and grains, such as bulrush millet. And now diets primarily consist of chicken, chips, or French fries, eggs, fish, sardines, and vegetables, which are culturally very different from the diets that pastoralists had been consuming prior. So here's a summary of all of the ways that diets have been changing over time in this population. So essentially declines in milk, meat, and blood consumption. Wild fruit and vegetable consumption has also declined and been replaced by greater intakes of cereals and maize porridge and conventional farmed vegetables. So there's kind of a set of maybe 10 or 12 farmed vegetables that are very popular, replacing a list of hundreds of wild foods. Among the Maasai specifically, there's, which is the pastoralist community in this area, there's a greater consumption of chicken, eggs, and fish. And there's a specific example of other foods called chips mai, or essentially French fries with an egg cooked in on top, which is a major shift for food culture in these communities. There's also a noted shift in food preparation, going from traditional boiling and grilling to more roasting and frying with oils. So here's a list of all of the most important drivers of food change. Here we have climate change, population growth and migration, market infrastructure, interethnic exchange, religion, child schooling, and health education. So now I'm going to go into an example of this driver of change with the example of milk. So our end outcome is decreased milk consumption. We have several pathways that lead into this change over time. So the first one starts with weather or change in climate, which leads to a reduced space for grazing and watering of cattle. This, if we follow kind of the top path along this graph, it leads to more migration and settlement as space for pastoralism has declined. People switch to crop cultivation and living together in cities, which leads to population growth and interethnic exchange of different groups coming together and living in the same area. This all leads into an increased acceptability of different types of foods, new foods, specifically the conventional farmed foods, and like chips mai, for example. And then if we follow along the bottom, reduced grazing land also leads into increased land allocation for crop farming, as I mentioned, which expands market infrastructure for these specific types of vegetables and foods that are produced at higher rates. And then this also increases the acceptability of eating more of these types of foods. So we also have a pathway that more explains the economic shifts that lead to decreased milk consumption. So, of course, reduced grazing and water for cattle leads to fewer cattle, where pastoralists are more likely to sell their animals if they're sick or unhealthy, or of course just cattle deaths leading to fewer cattle. This of course leads to reduced production of milk and meat. Then we have a reduced availability in the market and in the household for individual consumption or for buying these products. And we see increased milk prices in the market, and then again, kind of an indirect leading to prioritization of milk sales over consumption because income is becoming more important. So then we see a third pathway which leads through children's schooling, again influencing the economy of milk markets. So prioritization of schooling leads to a greater need to engage in cash economy, so milk as a substance becomes less important than cash income for households. So parents are more likely to sell their milk so that they can send their children to school, again prioritizing milk sales over milk consumption, leading to decreased milk consumption. And then on the other side we have children attending school for longer, which leads to more interethnic exchange of children bringing home new customs from their school areas, leading to decreased milk consumption. And lastly, the simplest one, milk boiling has increased in these areas, and people are trying more now to boil milk each time before feeding it to children due to health education in these areas, and that requires the resources to boil milk and to store the milk, and this becomes more challenging and difficult for families as they don't have access to these resources. A much more simple example of these drivers of changes in decreasing blood consumption. We have these four drivers of change kind of combining together to result in this outcome. So first, of course, declines in cattle health overall leads to less cattle. Zoonosis education and pastoralists understanding the negative health effects of drinking blood of ill cattle, and then with increasing religious groups in the area, specifically Christianity in these regions, pastoralists are now less likely to drink blood because it's less socially acceptable, and again interethnic exchange with other groups that don't culturally drink blood, reducing the acceptability of these practices. I'm going to skip affordability for time. So the next steps of our project is to finalize our coding and our analysis. We'll continue the qualitative analysis to understand the availability, acceptability, affordability, convenience of these foods, including trade-offs, and then we will also combine with the analysis of quantitative data and triangulate the two between household interviews and household survey data to explore livelihood shifts, women's time allocation, and food choices. So we'd like to thank the Gates Foundation, UK Aid, and the University of South Carolina for their support in funding this project. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so wonderful. We had 3 presentations, one from Guatemala about food choices in the context of the poor people there and what happens when they're exposed to more resources, and one from Anna about food prices, and the last one that Jasmine just gave. So we'll take a few minutes for questions, comments from the audience before we go to the other presentations. Anybody? Someone in the back here?
Thank you. It's a question for the last speaker. Fascinating project. The drivers diagrams that you showed, it wasn't clear if those were conceptual diagrams of ways that you are going to investigate, or if those came out of the empirical work that you've already done. Could you just clarify where those came from?
Is this on? Yeah. Yes, those were empirical from the data through the analysis that we've done so far. So we've done a complete analysis of our round 1 data and are about 3/4 of the way done through round 4. So when we triangulate the quantitative with qualitative, then we'll have our final round of papers, but so far that's what we've found.
This question is for Anna. I'm wondering if you can, I'm over here. Can you talk a little bit more about how you define a nutritious food basket as opposed to the normal food basket? How you find nutritious?
Thanks. Yeah, so we actually used a rating system for these were the consumer price index is composed of individual items, and there's, I forget how many, something like 60 or 80 food items in there, which the statistical service weights by expenditure share. So, you know, things like soft drinks will increase in weight as people spend more on them. So the weighting system we used is as a prototype, we used a scoring system called NuVal, which is a score from 1 to 100, which is an algorithm that takes into account nutrient content, other things like fiber. It subtracts things like added sugars and salts and fats, and you get actually a score for each food. There are a lot of those type of systems out there, and so the results that were presented here are the kind of first cut with that scoring system, and we're going to compare it to some other ones and make sure that the ranking comes out the same. That's the general principle.
This question is for Diana. In looking at the price experience that you had, the last one with the family, it had the man pointing to the flyer, and I was just wondering if you had any insight into how, like, the man and the woman played off of each other, or if the presence of a child might have affected their choices at the end of the day.
Excuse me, will you speak slow?
Yeah,
please?
sure. So in that slide where you had the photographs of the different choice experiments, I was wondering, so I saw in the last one that was specifically the man that was pointing to the flyer, and I was wondering if you had any insight into how either the man and the woman played off of each other in making that decision, or if it was exclusively the man choosing which foods.
Okay.
If I may, my question is very closely related to that.
Sorry.
In the graph, there's a number of food groups, and when men choose it, women choose it jointly, and in both cases, jointly is worse than both men and women. So close, like, if you can just talk about that, it's like lower food group than if men choose it and women choose it. So I'm very interested. So that, yeah.
Oh, okay. We in the flip chart we have different products, but all the products are are related with a food group. Yeah, and we in the rounds the women choose individual to the men, and they do together. but between them, the idea is they talk between them and then choose on the products of the FLIR chart. But yeah, each product is corresponding with a food group that is based on the HDDS groups, the 12 groups. I don't know if I answered the question or at least.
Yeah, my question goes to the first speaker, and it's related to a previous question at the back there. I saw a bar chart where you indicated the prices of the nutritious foods in, is it Pakistan or somewhere? So I wanted to know how you arrived at the prices. Was it per unit kilogram, or was it a consumer price index, or you were trying to explain? Yeah.
Thanks. So in Pakistan, as well as in Ghana and Tanzania, the three countries where I showed results, the prices come from the statistical, well, in Pakistan it was the statistical organization at national level, and they record the price per kg or per liter of foods, and then we convert that into price